Welcome back to the Business from Scratch podcast. I'm your host, Abby McGee, and today we are getting into something that trips up almost every small business owner at some point. And honestly, some of us never fully figure this out. We're going to talk about pricing. How do you decide what to charge? Is your price too low? Is it too high? Are you leaving money on the table, or are you pricing yourself out of the market completely? These are questions that keep people up at night, and a lot of times business owners just pick a number that feels right, or they look at what a competitor is charging and copy it. And then they wonder why they're working constantly and still not getting ahead. Today, we're going to try and fix that. We're going to walk through the three main pricing approaches, what each one means, when to use them, and how to think about combining them to land on a number that actually works for your business. And look, I'll be honest with you because that's what the show is about. Salt and Charm got this wrong for a long time. For longer than I'd like to admit, we were pricing off of feel, what seemed reasonable, what we thought customers would pay, what felt competitive. We weren't running the math, we were running on instinct. And instinct will only take you so far. It wasn't until we got serious about tracking weekly, not monthly, not quarterly, but weekly, and started looking at the granular details of what it actually cost us to churn out our products that the picture became clear. Labor creeping up on a particular item, food cost shifting, little things that don't feel like a big deal until you zoom out and realize they've been essentially eroding your margin for months. Once we started doing that work, we stopped guessing and started making decisions. And that's when our pricing actually started making sense, not just for winning business, but for sustainability and profit health. Those are two very different things, and a lot of small business owners are optimizing for the first one while completely ignoring the second. So if you're sitting there thinking, I kind of just charge what feels right, I see you, I was you. And this is your sign to change that. And if you caught episode 27, where we talked about reading your P&L and your balance sheet, this episode is the natural next step because pricing and your financials are deeply connected. You can't price well if you don't know your numbers. So if you missed that one, go back and listen. Okay, let's get into it. You're listening to Business from Scratch, the podcast for people building businesses they love without losing themselves along the way. I'm your host, Abby McGee. Let's get started. The first approach is cost plus pricing, and this is the one most people start with because it's the most straightforward. The idea is simple. Figure out what it costs you to make your product or deliver your service, then add a markup on top. That markup is your profit. So if it costs you $40 to produce something and you want a 50% markup, you charge $60. Done. This approach is important because it makes sure you're at least covering your cost. You'd be shocked how many small business owners are charging prices that don't even cover what it costs them to deliver, and they have no idea because they've never actually done the math. So here's how to actually run it. Add up all your direct costs, your materials, your packaging, labor directly tied to that product or service, then factor in a portion of your overhead, which would be rent, software, insurance, utilities, etc. Divide that overhead across your products or services so every unit is carrying its fair share. Then add your desired profit margin on top of that. Cost plus pricing keeps you protected, but it does have a ceiling. It's based entirely on your costs, and it doesn't account for what the market will pay or what your work is actually worth to the customer. So use it as your floor or the minimum you should ever charge. But don't stop there. So here's a real example from Salt and Charm. We sell our Sriracha Bacon Deviled Eggs 24 to an order for $48. Let's break that down. Our food cost runs at about $13.44. Labor is about $15.36. Together, food and labor alone account for $28.80 of that $48 order. That's 60% of the price gone before we've paid $1 of overhead. No rent, no equipment, no packaging, no insurance. That leaves $19.20, which is 40%, to cover everything else and actually make a profit. Now you see why the math matters, because $48 for deviled eggs sounds perfectly fine until you run the numbers and realize exactly how much of it is already spoken for before it ever hits your pocket. Okay, now the second approach is value-based pricing, and this is where things get more interesting. Instead of starting with your cost and working up, you start with a different question. What is it worth to the customer? What problem does it solve? What transformation does it create in their life? What would it cost them to not have it? The price is based on the value delivered, not the time or materials it took you to deliver it. At Salt and Charm, this comes into play all the time. The work we do for clients isn't just the hours we put in or the materials we use, it's the outcome. It's the experience, the expertise, the result they couldn't get somewhere else. When you start pricing from that angle, the conversation shifts completely. You're not justifying an hourly rate, you're communicating the value of a result. Think about it this way. If a consultant saves a business $200,000, what's their advice worth? It's a lot more than their hourly rate times the hours they spent. That is value-based pricing. This approach requires confidence and a lot of understanding. You have to be able to articulate the value to yourself first and then to your customer. If you can't explain why your price is what it is in terms of what the customer gets, this approach falls apart. It also requires that you actually know your customer well enough to understand what the outcome means to them. This episode is supported by Salt and Charm, the business I built long before this podcast ever existed. We offer luxury private chef experiences, full-service catering, and curated weekly meal prep delivery in Wilmington and surrounding areas. Salt and Charm is where I've learned the lessons I share here about resilience, leadership, growth, and building something that doesn't run your life. We believe hosting should feel joyful and everyday meals should feel intentional. If you're in Wilmington, Hampstead, Wrightsville Beach, or Brunswick County, we'd love to serve you. Visit us on Instagram at Salt and Charm and on our website at saltandcharm.co to learn more. And just for our listeners here on the podcast, get $10 off your next meal prep order by using code PODCAST at checkout. Every week, we feed hundreds of people at their dinner tables, and we would love to help make your week a little less stressful and a lot more delicious. The third approach is competitive pricing, which means looking at what others in your market are charging and positioning your price relative to theirs. Are you the premium option or the accessible option? Are you going to go head-to-head with a direct competitor and try to stay in the same range? Competitive pricing is genuinely useful for market research. When you're launching something new, or entering a space you haven't been in before. Knowing what the market looks like gives you important context. It tells you what customers are already conditioned to expect to pay. It's also useful as a gut check. If you run your cost plus math and come up with a price that's dramatically higher or lower than everyone else in your market, that's a signal worth paying attention to. But here's where I'm going to push back a little, and I think it's important to understand this. Do not build your pricing strategy entirely around what your competitors charge, because you don't know their numbers. You don't know their cost structure, their margins, their overhead, or whether they're actually profitable at that price. Copying a competitor's price and assuming it works for you is one of the most common and most dangerous mistakes in small business pricing. You also risk a race to the bottom. If your whole strategy is charge a little less than them, eventually someone undercuts you and now you're both losing. Use competitive pricing as context, but not as your foundation. So, how do you actually use all three? Here's a framework I'd give you. Start with cost plus to establish your floor. Know exactly what it costs you to deliver Add your minimum acceptable margin, and that's the lowest you should ever go. Not sometimes, ever. Layer in value-based thinking to find your ceiling. What is this actually worth to your customer? What outcome are you delivering? Price toward that, and don't be afraid if it's significantly higher than your cost plus number. That gap is called margin, and margin is what keeps your business alive and growing. And then use competitive pricing as your reality check. Once you've landed on a number, look at the market. Are you wildly out of range? If so, figure out why and either adjust your positioning or get better at communicating your value. The sweet spot is somewhere in the middle of all three. A price that covers your cost, reflects your value, and makes sense in the context of your market. One more thing I want to say here, and I say this especially to service-based business owners: stop undercharging. I know it feels safer. I know it feels like it'll help you win more clients, but chronically underpriced services lead to overworked, underpaid, burned out business owners, and that is not the business you set out to build. Know your worth and then price accordingly. Okay, that's episode 28 of Business from Scratch. If you haven't listened to episode 27 yet, go back and do that. Understanding your P&L, your balance sheet, those will make everything we talked about today click even harder. These two episodes are a package deal and topics that I wish I had better understanding of in the early days of my businesses. If this was helpful, share it. Leave a review. Tell another business owner. That's how we grow this thing together, and I sure do appreciate it. Thanks for joining me on Business from Scratch. Follow the show for more honest conversations about building a business that works for you.